wild garden, to which he had added lilies of the valley, and the first time I was allowed to visit his grave, I carried a drooping bunch of them and laid them there. That was later, of course. It was years before I was told how and why he died. As I watched the man working that day, I was thinking of those mornings of the late 1920s. Perhaps children remember more than we realize, and the expedition from town house to country place was certainly impressive. The 6 or 7 servants, including a butler, we 4 children with nurses and governesses, mother and her personal maid, and usually a dog or 2, excited at the prospect of freedom and strange new scents. Inside the big house, everything would be in order. Mother would look it over with complacency. The enormous drawing room, with the conservatory opening off it, both closed now for years, her morning room, the library, and Father's den. She would glance in at the service wing, where Helga and the kitchen maid were already fussing with the huge coal stove, but she never stayed in the kitchen. That was Helga's realm. After that, she would go up the stairs to her big bedroom over the front veranda, the one where years later my sister Judith was to nail the windows shut, and watch her maid unpacking the trunks. She was a large woman, Mother, dominant, and, I realize now, very proud of her wealth and social position. She would stand by while her handsome clothes came out of the trunks to be hung on perfumed hangers, and her jewels went into the wall safe beside the big old walnut bed. If I was lucky, she would not notice me, so I could stay. Sometimes, however, she ordered me out. I think now I understand why she never really cared for me. She looked after me, of course. No one could say any of the Maynard children was neglected. But it must have shocked her profoundly when 10 years after Judith, she found I was on the way. My sister Anne was 14 then, Phil was 13, and Judith was 10. That was after the first Great War, when the world was pretending to be at peace, and we were carrying on as though there was no such thing as taxes, or an approaching end to our sort of living, or even another and more devastating conflict. I arrived, however, a black-haired, squealing baby who remained skinny for years, and a living, breathing embarrassment to Mother up to the day of her death. Outside of that, in summer, the Maynard family carried on much as usual for several years. In the mornings, the chauffeur and the high Pierce Arrow carried Father 5 miles to the railroad, where he commuted to New York and his brokerage house, and met him in the evenings. In the afternoons, Mother either drove about the countryside making calls at the other summer places, or sat home in state to receive them. I can still remember her, sitting beside her tea-table with its glittering expanse of silver and china, and the butler of the moment carrying in trays of thin bread and butter, hot buttered biscuits or scones, and cakes of all sorts. Perhaps all this background is not necessary to my story, but in a way it is. So much happened at the Birches years later, and so much of it was the outgrowth of those early days. Young as I was only 6 or so, I remember clearly when Anne was married there, in the summer of 1928. It was a huge wedding, with a marquee on the lawn, a band there for dancing, and an orchestra in the house. And of all things, I was a flower girl, in white tulle and a white lace cap. Phil said I looked like a Charlotte Russe, which I do not doubt. But Anne had married rather poorly, according to Mother. Martin Harrison was an unsuccessful architect, and nothing much to look at. But I dare say Anne loved him. At least she stuck to him, which is more than Judith did. I realize now that Father hated ostentation. When I missed him, I often found him down by the creek, and we would stay there for hours. But it was rare for him to make any protest. As I have said, he was a quiet man, soft-spoken and gentle, and I adored him. I would slip out of my nursery in order to waylay and hug him on his way out to the incessant dinner parties that were a part of the summer season. But I always disappeared before Mother came rustling out. I could see her, however, by peeping around a corner. She was handsome, as Anne was later, but never the beauty Judith became.